wrote this book a few years ago, and it had to deal with a lot of the division that we have in our country. It dealt with division with race, division with religion, particularly the historical divisions between the Catholics and the Protestants. It dealt with division based on regions, going back to our Civil War, the North against the South. It talked about the division that we see in our politics, Republicans and Democrats. There's so much division that it just overcomes our daily lives. When I came up with the name of the book, I wanted it to be something that was a patriotic theme. I took the song that Kate Smith did years ago, God Bless America. And even though that song represents almost like a prayer that God will bless our country, it still didn't describe where we are. And so I added in, God bless our divided America. And so when you look at the current events, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're weeks away from George Floyd's unfortunate death, which has literally torn our country apart. We see protests worldwide. We see it in Mexico, Canada. We see it in England, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, Greece. It goes into Africa. We see it in Asia. We see something that happened in Minnesota being protested all over the world. And so we ask ourselves, why? Why are tens of thousands of people protesting unjustly death in someone in Minnesota? It comes down to the fact that we're all part of the human race. It doesn't matter if you see an injustice in Minnesota, somebody in India is going to still feel that same pain. They're going to still feel that same hurt, and they're going to protest. That is the theme of this book. The video that you're about to see is an illustration of each of the chapters. It gives a short description of the chapters taken from the book. But I also added in another piece. I added in a musical piece because I wanted that to be an example of how something like music that can be taken from a different culture, but yet people of diverse backgrounds can enjoy it. It's an example of how we can have a common bond taken from another culture. It's an example of how we need to strengthen our multicultural and our multiracial bonds. That's something that we all need to work on. I thank you for joining me in supporting this book, but most of all, I thank you, Father, because God is the one who is bringing us all together. Thank you.
One of the main essential elements to achieving and maintaining unity is having steady, responsible leadership. It doesn't matter if we're talking about our military, a sports team, the church, our government, a business, or an individual family. Without some degree of responsible leadership, the door will always be open to destructive division. Our nation is one body with many parts. Same is true with the church at large, one body with many parts. Chapter 1 is the book's foundational chapter. It walks us through the biblical concept of unity while answering the basic question, what is unity? What are the essential elements needed for unity? And on the flip side, what are the risks and challenges to unity? The spirit of division cannot be taken lightly. So it brings us to the critical question, can a divided church help heal a divided nation? For the war between unity and division is a constant chess match of moves and counter moves, pitting one group against another. Who is the true enemy? When we have Americans against Americans, do we see our fellow countrymen as actual enemies? If we were to go back and study the lesser-known details from the Civil War era, it will help us to connect the dots regarding the reasons why today's political polarizations exist. What are some of the root causes behind the nation becoming divided during the periods leading up to the start of the Civil War? And how are those root causes consistent to today's political tribalism? Well, the house divided against itself cannot stand. It didn't stand then, and it can't stand now. Chapter 2 illustrates examples of political exploitation and one-sided government policies during the Civil War era. So another critical question, as a citizen today, are we Republicans and Democrats first, or are we Americans first? Are we more drawn to elected policymakers who promote tribalism and division, or to those who promote national unity combined with true American patriotism? When tribal solidarity overrules national unity, the interest of the tribe is the new primary focus. Then it was the North tribe against the South tribe. Today it's the Republican tribe against the Democratic tribe. Regardless, it's still Americans against Americans. As we look at the historical significance of the Civil War, the main takeaway should not be the tribalism between two opposing sides. Primary focus should be about oneness. It should be about reconciliation. Oneness in the fact that division was defeated by unity, and two bitterly opposed sides reconcile, resulting in two becoming one again. So if our focus is on maintaining oneness, there will never be no need for future reconciliation. While sitting in a jail cell, Martin Luther King wrote a letter in response to a newspaper article addressed to him by 9 white clergymen. They questioned why he came all the way from Atlanta to Birmingham, basically causing so much trouble. As a man in jail with nothing but time on his hands, he provided a rather lengthy but respectful response. In his Birmingham jail letter, he wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He tried to get them to see that the body is a network of parts which are interconnected and interdependent of each other. He also wrote, "It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers." In other words, as a fellow clergyman, he was trying to explain to them the need for empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. He also understood the power of democracy. When democracy, given a fair chance to reach all people, it levels the playing field for everyone. For that reason, he attempted to get them to understand that devious methods by state governments were effective in containing the black vote, thus causing people to march in protest. Fast forward from 1963 to today, and we still find ministers in certain communities being watchful of modern-day tactics meant to weaken the effectiveness of democracy when it comes to the vote. Therefore, the need to march for fairness will probably never end. The 2020 pandemic has shown us that our elected leaders' success and their failures will directly touch all of our lives. Unfortunately, our future history will reveal the full impact and damage from today's voter apathy. Chapter 3 is about heeding the call for aid. Not everyone is willing to come to the aid of their fellow brothers and sisters, even when they have the ability to do so. And while the Birmingham jail letter had little impact on the hearts and minds of the 9 clergymen, it was described as the most important document of the civil rights era. The letter is recommended reading in its entirety because it provides a blueprint for racial reconciliation in the church. Dr. King sought to have a meaningful dialogue in which the white clergymen would see him as their brother in Christ rather than a second-class black man or an annoying civil rights leader. He wanted the white church to be an active partner in the black community, working side by side in the fight against all forms of injustice. In other words, he wanted a sincere relationship, regardless of race. And while the words "we the people" are written as part of the Constitution's preamble, initially the idea of an equal society for all people was not an accurate description. There were unwritten exclusions concerning certain groups of people. The "we the people" reference did not always apply to the entire American population. There is a gap between the goal we are striving to reach, which is an all-inclusive society, and then our current position, a society which continues to embrace the exclusion of others. Franklin Roosevelt addressed this inclusion gap by stating, "We are trying to construct a more inclusive society. We're going to make a country in which no one is left out." His words are noble, but 74 years after the end of Roosevelt being president, the inclusion gap still exists. The gap continues to narrow and tangible progress can be measured, but progress is slow. How do we as a nation become more inclusive where no one is left out, as Franklin Roosevelt envisioned? Chapter 4 is the chapter on inclusion. As our nation becomes more diverse, its diversity does not automatically mean inclusion. Inclusion is making everyone know, without a doubt, they are part of the body. Inclusion is an honest effort in making people feel welcome by your written and spoken words, backed up by your actions. Inclusion is being consistent in practicing the golden rule, treating others as one would wish to be treated. The chapter reminds us that open dialogue is critical, but for full inclusion, creating and maintaining a level playing field is mandatory. Creating a level playing field by changing hard hearts and narrow minds. In March 2015, then House Speaker John Boehner sent a formal letter to the Vatican inviting Pope Francis to address a joint session of Congress. With his acceptance, the Pope's U.S. visit in September 2015 marked the first time a reigning pontiff has ever spoken before Congress. Lost in the excitement of the Pope's visit was the fact that past generations of Protestant Americans maintained deep hostilities against people of Roman Catholic faith. The warm reception extended to Pope Francis by members of Congress illustrated how far we have progressed as a nation when it comes to religious intolerance toward Catholics. During the 1920s, such a speech would have been impossible. The Ku Klux Klan, driven by their religious bigotry, resisted the influx of Southern and Eastern European immigrants who were mainly Catholic. With approximately 2 to 4 million Klansmen, they were a powerful force throughout the Southern and Midwestern states. The Klansmen detested blacks, but they despised Catholics almost as much. With their typical anger and intimidation, they were successful in pushing their anti-immigrant and their anti-Catholic sentiment into mainstream America. Sadly, much of the Southern clergy found themselves on the same side with the Klan as being untruthful defenders of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant belief that they were religiously superior people. The anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic hatred from the Klan was also effective in influencing government policy-making officials on the local, state, and federal levels. So what exactly is an angry man's candidate? Chapter 6 answers the question and shows examples of how the former governor of Alabama, George Wallace, was the textbook angry man's candidate. He maintained a win at any cost standard. His hate-filled words were sometimes deadly. He knew the right buttons to press and how to tap into the anger of his supporters for political gain. As a result, he perpetuated division while undermining the concept of diversity and unity. Long after George Wallace, modern-day angry man candidates still exist. Some are more obvious than others, but we see them in Washington, in state houses, and in city halls. The words and actions from an angry man's candidate will always be a root cause of division. President Richard Nixon once told a senior aide that people react to fear, not love. They don't teach that in Sunday school, but it's true. His comments may represent the viewpoint of many people, but the scriptures make it perfectly clear. It states, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind." So why do so many Christian believers still fall prey to fear-mongering tactics presented by politicians? Throughout different eras of history, the degree of hostility and resentment toward immigrants will often fluctuate. At times it became aggressive and intense. During other periods the level dies down, sometimes becoming unnoticed. The targets for the hostility will also change over the years, but an immigrant is still an immigrant, regardless if he or she is Chinese, Japanese, Italian, Irish, Haitian, or Mexican. Past and present efforts show that immigrants are often unwanted people. Poverty is not by accident. Out of greed, America has had a habit of placing profits over people. It is written in the scriptures, "But God combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to those parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it." Meaning, out of compassion, if one person suffers, every person suffers with him. Before the existence of European immigrants, before the slave trade brought Africans to the southern colonies, before Chinese and Japanese immigrants populated the West Coast, and before Hispanic immigrants migrated from Central America to North America, the Native Americans were already here. This was their land. For generations, the Native American nations occupied hundreds of thousands of acres throughout North America long before the arrival of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Recognizing that the Indian nations were here first, the U.S. policy was to respect the rights of Native Americans. That respect didn't last very long. In short, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, thereby removing each of the Native American nations from their homelands throughout the Deep South. They were forcibly removed by federal soldiers from their homes, incarcerated in stockades, and then made to walk more than 1,000 miles under brutal conditions to an Indian reservation set aside for them in the area now known as Oklahoma. The U.S. government's decision to relocate over 60,000 Native Americans resulted in thousands of deaths from starvation, exposure, and disease. The brutal journey known as the Trail of Tears was particularly hard on infants, children, and the elderly. One soldier once wrote in his journal, "I fought in many wars between the states, and I've seen many men killed, some by my own hands. But the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." How can we still love our country, even when cruel and inhumane things such as the Trail of Tears is part of our history? The answer comes down to simply having a love for the body, love of country, even with all its imperfections.
As a continuation of the other chapters, we wanted to make this special because the name of the person that's on this building, Frances Perkins, she is a person that we all live her legacy. Not everyone knows her name, but because she was a fighter for workers' rights, she was a conscience-driven servant, which was an example for all of us. She saw situations that were wrong. She made it her life purpose to do something about it. And that's something that we all should do. When we see things wrong, we should be conscience-driven people and be wanting to make things where all of us are in fair situations. And that is why we're here, to honor her. The target audience was a debate that we had early on when developing the book. And then we realized that all of us are the target audience because every one of us has a say in division or unity. All of us have an opportunity to self-reflect and ask ourselves, am I the problem? Is voting, by me not voting, is that part of the problem? So I think all of us are the target audience. I think there's so much that needs to be said that is hard to capture in one book. And I believe that there will be eventually a second book.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, jump. 1, 2, 3, go. Is it fast?
This is Times Square, 42nd Street.